you don't really know in advance which ideas are good or bad. So it's just like people, what's the thing? You hire slowly and fire fast.
Yeah.
But I do hire fast and fire fast. So doing everything fast. So you have a business idea. Okay, here's the easiest way we could try it. Let's do it tomorrow. Did it work? No. Let's move on to the next one. People say, "Oh, ideas are a dime a dozen. Execution's everything." That is so incorrect. That statement. Ideas are not a dime a dozen. A good idea is hard. Second, execution. There's easy ways to execute, and there are hard ways to execute. If you have to have good execution ideas to execute in a smart way.
You have now entered the entrepreneur circle.
It's funny because I don't get to talk about TV. Entrepreneurs, nobody watches TV anymore, me included.
Even people used to tell me when my kids were very little, "Oh, I never let my kids watch TV."
Yeah.
And I'm like, really? Because why not expose your kids to tens of thousands of stories so that they can safely see all of these kind of intense things in life without actually having to experience them? You can't possibly experience all these things in one lifetime. So if they're in the house anyway and not running around on the playground, which is of course better, why not expose them to great art and storytelling? And again, storytelling is so primal to our evolution. It's a way to safely experience harder conditions so you don't have to live through them, but your body knows how to, and your mind knows how to deal with them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The thing that I have challenges with is so we're raising two little ones. My oldest is 5 and there's a 2-year-old, and my wife doesn't want to expose them to television at all. Because then it's replacing their creativity, which I get to a degree. But like you, I grew up, I was a latchkey kid and I was always watching television, and it really helped my creativity, like writing and drawing, and it just inspired me.
Yeah, the arc and every good thing that they're going to watch. So let's discount local news. Let's discount, 99.999% of reality TV, and let's just assume they're watching like good television, appropriate for their age group. Then they're going to get exposed to the arc of the hero over and over again, which is kind of the DNA of every single work of art in history. So they'll put in their 10,000 hours learning the arc of the hero. And, I see her point. Like, they could be reading books, they could be painting, but they're not going to do that all the time anyway. Like, it's not like anybody can be creative for 5-6 hours a day. You should be creative for like 1 to 3 hours a day, and rejuvenate. And television exposes you to different ideas. And I was always inspired, like whether it was reading comics, reading science fiction books, which a lot of people would look down on, or watching television. I was always inspired by good storytelling as a kid. And even now.
Absolutely. I mean, and like you said, we're sort of reaching this golden age of television where it's not just in cinema anymore. Like, you can just sit down and there's thousands of channels that you can access that all have great content.
Yeah, and we were just talking before the show started about Battlestar Galactica, which, not that anybody necessarily knows what that is, but one component of that story is that there are these human-like cyborgs that have kind of evolved and programmed themselves, and they really are human-like. And it becomes a whole question of ethics throughout the whole series. Like, are they, robots, or as they were, there was even a derogatory term for them on the show, skin jobs, or were they, deserving of the same rights as humans? And, kind of, again, a safe way to practice very difficult ethical questions is not, particularly we're moving into an age of genetic engineering, and where do the rights of a genetically engineered entity end, and where do they begin, and at what point?
This is a really interesting conversation that I had no idea we'd go down. But what do you think about fiction creating our reality?
Well, I don't know if it creates our reality or predicts our reality. Like, you look at science fiction from 100 years ago, predicted, or 150 years ago, predicted space travel, predicted things like telephones and computers and robots. So, I don't know. I don't know which came first, the prediction or the seeds of reality. Like, but I don't know. Science fiction, those are kind of futurist thinkers, and they translated that. Right now, futurists write nonfiction books, but previously, futurists wrote science fiction books.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant because listening to your content and also noticing it, as I was growing up, stuff, from Star Trek or whatever, the phones with the Motorola flip, that was the communicator in Star Trek, like people turn that into a reality.
Yeah, so you wondered, so Motorola made like that first flip phone, I think, and did they do that because, like, as a joke, like, oh, they did it on Star Trek, so we should do it for us? Or was there something pleasing about that form factor, that design, that made it so appealing on Star? Like, all of us kids then were pretending we had those flip phones.
Yeah.
It was very pleasing. Maybe it was the right design, and that form factor only lasted a few years before today's smartphones, but... Yeah. Maybe it comes back at some point now that we can start folding phones,
right.
related to Samsung.
Yeah. Do you think that the current, iPhones and smartphones are like the tricorders? I mean, it has everything in it.
Yeah, of
right?
course.
Yeah.
So the fact that, let's just look at what the Star Trek phone was. First off, it was a way to communicate.
Right.
Like, Scotty, beam me up. Second off, I don't know if it was the same device as the tricorder, but maybe let's just assume it was for a second. The fact that there were other apps on this device certainly was like today's smartphone.
Right.
And the fact that it would from a distance monitor your health metrics.
Yes,
but
exactly.
is that so much different? That's kind of the next generation of like a Fitbit, which will monitor, health maybe from a distance.
And I think you can actually attach things to the phones where it could take your blood, for diabetics and stuff. So I mean,
and already medical devices like that exist.
Right.
So like mobile stuff to take blood and analyze it. And then even stuff like the transporter, which is clearly not anywhere in our near future, has sparked debates in quantum mechanics, if teleportation can succeed, and ideas from quantum mechanics suggests that it can in some form or other.
Hasn't someone successfily transported molecules from one end of a room to another?
I believe so, yeah. And I think, I forget, there's always going to be, with quantum mechanics, there's always going to be missing information. That's kind of the whole point, is that you can't know at the same time the position and the rotation or the speed of a molecule. You can't know these two things at the same time. But the idea is, if you observe I don't know, I can't explain it, but I think the idea is that when you observe something on one point, it might change something very far away that makes it seem like teleportation.
Right.
So, although when I had Michio Kaku, the quantum, he writes a lot of pop science quantum mechanics books, and he also teaches at Columbia University. When I had both him and William Shatner on the podcast at the same time, we were discussing the quantum mechanics of teleportation, and he said the transporter was possible, but upon further questioning, I said, would that be, if I use the transporter, would I actually be transported, or would just a completely atom by atom imitation of me be transported, but I would actually be now dead?
Right.
And he said, unfortunately, yes, you would be dead, but no one would know, because it would be exactly the same as you on the surface.
Yeah, it reminds me of, and since we're already talking about pop culture and television and movies and stuff, which, like I said, I don't normally get to talk about, this is great and totally unexpected. But do you remember that movie with Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale? Where Prestige.
The Prestige was excellent.
Right?
I think,
and the ending was that. And spoiler alert for anyone. I mean, you should have watched it by now. It's like 15 years old.
Yeah.
But
the Prestige was beautiful, and we're recording this podcast in a stand-up comedy club. The ideas behind the Prestige are very similar to the ideas when you're doing stand-up comedy. Like, if you think about the comedian Andy Kaufman, I don't know if you're familiar with him, or surprise and like what's real and what's not. And doing a surprise on top of a surprise is often very much a part of comedy. The Prestige, how they define the Prestige in that movie is for magicians, but the exact same thing occurs in stand-up comedy. By the way, that term, the Prestige, doesn't actually occur in magician circles. It was just for that movie, but
okay.
but it was a very interesting concept.
Yeah. So, can you give me an example? And for those of you out there who already knows James, and I'm going to do a whole introduction, make sure everybody knows all your accolades and everything you've done. But you have recently jumped into the stand-up space and started, flexing those muscles and getting better and better at it. I already see improvement over the course of, I think, 6 months, a year. It's amazing how
Yeah,
you've
I've been
evolved.
doing it for like
It's
3 or
great.
4 years now.
It's great.
But like I feel like it's like a Moore's law of comedy.
Yeah.
Like, and this is true for anything. If you just want to improve 1% a day at everything, compounded, that means you're going to double in ability every 72 days, the rule of 72. So if something compounds 1% a day, it doubles. Like if your bank account compounds 1% a day, if you start off $100 in 72 days, you'll have $200. So I always try for anything I'm interested in, and this applies not just to comedy, it can apply to investing, it can apply to entrepreneurship, it can apply to relationships, parenting, whatever. If you try to improve 1% a day at the things you love doing, you're going to double in ability in every 72 days. Now, that's a real formula. And now, even though comedy is somewhat qualitative, you can put in the work every day to say, or with investing, you can put in the work every day to say, I probably did improve 1, 2, 1.5% today. And so I feel like there's this Moore's law of comedy that I see for myself and in any area of life, that I basically every 2 months, I think 100% different than I was 2 months earlier.
So what are some of the things you do to improve? Like, do you go back, watch tapes?
Yeah, I'll watch
listen to
videos
yourself?
of myself. Doing that right there and writing notes on that, that's a 1%. That's a 1%.
Do you find that a difficult task? I find it difficult. I watch myself when I do presentations. It's tough, but I do it. Do you find it difficult?
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's not as difficult as going on the stage and actually doing it, but to watch yourself and hear your voice. People have a natural hatred towards hearing their own voice. Or like, do I really look like that? But you notice things. Like, for instance, on the last video that Jay sent me, I noticed, that's odd. I never noticed that before. But I had like a tiny like hunch forward while I was doing the comedy, because maybe I was a tiny bit nervous and it was in my body that way. So instead of me saying and ah, which maybe I used to do and I've corrected that, now the nervousness is like going into my shoulders a little bit.
What did you do to get rid of the ums and ah? I do it all
Just
the time.
watching it on video and being aware of it. Awareness is the key to everything.
But how do you prevent yourself when you're talking from doing it?
It's better to be silent than to say and ah.
Okay.
So people say and ah, particularly in comedy, because they're afraid of pauses. And when people pause while you're doing comedy, you think they're not, when there's a silence, you think people don't like you, and you're afraid to pause, and you feel like you have to keep them constantly engaged. But then you become a slave to the audience. And so instead of becoming a slave, the body's natural reaction, this fear of not being accepted by the tribe, you try to bridge that with ums and ahs. And so just being aware, like, I'll still say ums and ahs, but then at least now I'm aware and I stop it. And so there's various things. I won't talk in a normal tone, which I think is boring to do on a stage. Like so it's better to always, so you asked what I do to improve. I'll watch videos of myself, but I'll also watch videos of other comedians. So every day I'll watch like probably an hour or more of comedy. If I'm doing comedy that night, I'll watch much more. If I'm on just a regular day, I'll just watch an hour. But let's say I watch Dave Chappelle. And then a critical thing is to notice what he's doing that's unique. Is he just telling jokes? Is he just telling stories? But then try writing down what he's saying, and you could see how he's structuring a joke, and you could see it seems like he's just riffing, but he clearly thought this out in advance. Once you write it down, you see. But then also try imitating him, and you realize, he's not talking. He's doing a performance. Like, he's not just telling, like, hey, what happened to me the other day? He's like, and what happened to me the other day? There's like that extra thing, and it's not a normal voice. But you don't realize that until you're mimicking him.
Right. It's choreographed, right?
Yeah.
It's very well methodical. You remind me of one of the best stand-up ever. Obviously Eddie Murphy and Delirious and that stuff, I grew up with. But Chris Rock's Bring the Pain.
Yeah.
The way he paces back and forth, and when he's just punching his fist or everything, like you said, I somewhat mimicked it. I watched it so many times, the beats and the way he moved and the way where he was on stage when he was telling the jokes.
Well, that's very astute because Tony Rock's been on my podcast, his brother, and Tony Rock says, you know why Chris Rock walks around the stage like that? And he walks around pretty fast.
Like a predator.
Yeah, he walks around pretty fast. He does that for a very strategic reason, is that if you close your eyes, you won't know where he is. So you have to kind of keep focused on him. You always want, it's like writing. You want to give people as many reasons as possible to like what you write. So for instance, when I write a post, this applies more to like blogs than books, but when I write a post, I'll, make it very story, like I'll make the story good, but I'll also try to make it humorous at points. But I'll also put in images that are good images that might have information in them or be funny. So I give people a lot of reasons to go. And sometimes I'll do the so-called listicle. So it makes it easier for people who don't really feel like reading. It makes it easier to just see the 10 things.
Yeah.
So all these ways to going into the article that might make a like. So with Chris Rock, it's again, you come up with many ways so that people have to pay attention to you. So just is he funny? That's one reason to pay attention. Is the story interesting? That's another reason to pay attention. Oh, he's moving really fast. Like I have to keep paying attention to him so I just see where he is. And then he talks in that weird way on stage, right? He's like, you know what it is with dating? He has that.
Does he talk like that in real life?
No, of course not. He's doing that because it's hard to hear unless you pay attention to every word. Like if you just are like casually paying attention, you will not understand a single word he says.
Right.
So Dave Chappelle has similar things. He'll stop, he'll smoke a cigarette. Sometimes he very early on trains the audience to laugh. Like he'll tell a joke, he'll start laughing, he'll lean over, he'll hit his knee with the microphone while he's laughing. That's this huge signal that the audience now needs to laugh. And it's all carefully calculated. These guys are brilliant.
Yeah. So what is it that inspired you to take a stab and start doing it?
Well, I've been a fan all my life of comedians. I mean, I used to work at HBO before I started my first business, and part of what I was doing at HBO was helping their comedy department, which they were the biggest purveyors of comedy on television, and in part because they had a huge comedy department and they owned half of Comedy Central at the time. And I just did but I would go to the Aspen Comedy Festival. I would go to all the stand-up performances around town. This is like 1997. Everybody you know of as like this major mega movie star right now, they would be doing open mics, which are like amateur mics, on stage all around New York City back then. So like people like Amy Poehler or Mark Maron or David Cross, all these, Bob Odenkirk, we just talked about Breaking Bad. They were like stand-up comics back in the day and just beginning.
Yeah.
So it was fascinating to watch. So I really wanted to do it, but I was terrified to go on stage. I was really afraid the audience was going to heckle me. And even when I was sitting in the crowd, I was always afraid the stand-up comedians were going to make fun of me. So I was just afraid of it. And ultimately, I was so afraid I stopped going to live stand-up comedy for many years. But I always wanted to do it. So Stephen Dubner, who wrote Freakonomics, he and I challenged each other. We're going to do stand-up comedy on this day. It was 3 months in the future. And, we sold out the Bell House in Brooklyn. And we did it. And I'm like, oh my God, that was the best 6 minutes of my life.
It was your first time?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then I just got addicted and I couldn't stop doing it. So I started doing it all around town, and I've been doing, the most I've ever done in 1 week is maybe 10 times in 1 week, which is actually not a lot for a beginning stand-up, but because I study it so much and because I've had, I've gotten really good at studying new things to learn. So whether it's like investing or entrepreneurship, I didn't have any traditional background, so I always was terrified. Oh, I didn't go to business school, so how am I going to be an entrepreneur? I'd always have these things, but I no excuses allowed. I'd always then figure out, how do I skip the line so I don't have to do the so-called 10,000 hours to become an expert at this.
Yeah.
And so I kind of figured out for every effort, what are the things in common to learning how to be good at something worth doing. And with comedy, I started doing the same thing, so I can start skipping the line. And like I said, there's almost this Moore's law to it. I feel every month or so, I'm like 100%. I don't know if better is. I don't want to say that, but at least different. So I'm trying new things, new styles. I'm learning new things. If you ask me who my favorite comedians, every week or two, it's someone different.
Did you surround yourself with, your favorite comedians or just funny people or people that you've deemed funnier than you
Yes.
and all the time? And
Yeah.
you sort of started to get that muscle and confidence going?
Yeah, and it was tricky because like I run a business, I write books, I write articles that have nothing to do with any of this stuff. I invest. I'm a professional investor and an entrepreneur, so it was hard. Like it wasn't like I was going to say, well, I'm going to just drop everything and hang out in some seedy comedy club from sleep all day and then hang out from 9 p.m. to 2 in the morning every day. Like I had to kind of. And I still deal with this. How do I bring this aspect of my life in? I can't do it the way a real professional comedian would do it, but I'm still fascinated by it. But now I've been trying to figure out how to integrate it back into my normal life. That's really more the key, is that don't, just because you love tennis, for instance, you can get good, but you don't have to be in the hierarchy of professional tennis players to feel good about your improvement in tennis. So I feel like in a comedy club, I'm good, but now I can take those skills, and they're amazing, and they're amazingly difficult skills in comedy. I can take those skills and bring them back into my business life, whether it's public speaking or writing or even negotiating or selling or investing, or like we were just talking about The Prestige. I can see a movie like that and say, oh, these elements of comedy, that's how they wrote this story. Kind of the surprise within the surprise. And, with selling, and it's so important, it's changed my sales, or even public speaking. I would say my public speaking is probably, and again, these are hard to quantify, but I would say for myself, it's probably about 10 times better than it was, because now I have this new skill set I can reach into. And it is a hard skill set. And I'll give an example. Like chess, when I was a kid, I was 17, I started playing chess. After about 15 months, I was one of the top young players in the country in terms of ranking. I was New Jersey's junior champion. And that was like 15 months of playing. I was a master strength player because I really learned how to get good at it. With comedy, despite all the experience I've had at learning how to learn difficult things, here I am, third or fourth year into it. It's much more difficult than chess. It's much more difficult than investing was for me. It's like a real difficult set of skills.
So what makes it so difficult?
Well, because most people start off thinking, well, I got to be able to tell jokes and be funny. But, if you're funny with your friends, that's different than being funny to a group of drunk Norwegian tourists. So, because you have to be funny in every situation, or at least understand what to do in every situation. By the way, that's important to know, too. Not every situation you're going to make everyone laugh. It depends how the seating is. It depends who the audience is. It depends what day it is. It depends if it's raining outside. It depends who was up before you. It depends on the quality of the MC.
Yeah.
So given each situation, there's maybe 100,000 different types of situations. You kind of have to know what to do for every situation. And that takes a lot of time that I don't have and that I'm not going to be able to put in. So I have to figure out all the shortcuts. But there's all these, what I call micro skills. So there's humor. There's likability, or what to do if you're not planning on being likable. Because some comedians are not likable, but they get their funny from that. There's stage work. What, like you mentioned with Chris Rock, what's his presence on the stage like, and how does that help? Everything has to help move the story forward, just like in writing. So the stage work's critical. Every motion he does, there's a reason. Then there's crowd work. If I talk to someone in the crowd, how do you improvise and riff? The weaker side will just say, hey, what do you do? Where are you from? That's how a lot of, but there's other things you can do that are much more interesting.
Yeah.
There's improvisation. If something happens where you're forced to improvise, you have to be able to improvise on the fly. You're never going to have this audience again in this configuration. And if they're not laughing at what you're doing, you need to start improvising immediately.
Right.
And that's just a few. I could list probably 30 skills that are equally difficult and mutually exclusive of each other. So your ability to do crowd work has nothing to do with your ability to sit at home and write a joke, has nothing to do with your stage presence, has nothing to do with your different kinds of crowd work, has nothing to do with your likability. These are all different skills.
Yeah, I mean, that's perfectly put. So now I totally understand what you're saying there. I'm curious, when you do presentations, like business conferences, and you're on stage, does it ever morph? Like, do you feel like, okay, I have a mic in my hand, I'm going to tell a couple jokes here? Like,
yeah.
Does your mind just shift into comedy?
Well, it's not shift as much as I combine the two skill sets. So public speaking has is a set of skill sets that's very hard. So I've been public speaking for 20 years. I've done hundreds of talks, but for the 2 to 4 years, or for the past 2 to 4 years, I've made a conscious effort to say no to. I did one public talk for Adobe in California because it was helping out a friend of mine. But I said no to basically every public talk because I wanted to focus on stand-up comedy. It's only so much time to do all these things. But more recently, I've decided, you know what? I'm not that interested in just being really good, like I said, for a room full of, a half-empty room full of like drunk tourists on a Saturday night. I want to bring these skills back into doing what I do best, which is, talking to people who came to see me to hear what particular message or ideas I have to share. But now I'm able to bring back that stand-up comedy skill set. And so, yeah, I instead of just telling stories that are funny, I might tell stories that have the stand-up comedy extra flair on top of it. It's not just funny. It's, again, the stage presence, the crowd work, the understanding what is the crowd thinking. You have a much deeper understanding of what every person in the crowd is up to and how you can surprise them and how you can do something that's a little bit. So I've always been a little bit shocking with my writing. I think that's why people like to read it, or with my public speaking. But with comedy, it's like 10 times that. You have to kind of shock and awe. And bringing that back into public speaking in a very visceral way. I did something 2 or 3 weeks ago where I was speaking and emceeing at kind of a very private sort of TED type of conference. And it's about 200 people in the audience. And again, using the comedy skills plus now I'm able to bring in my life experiences in ways that I can't with stand-up comedy. I'm able to combine the two now in front of an audience that knows me. Yeah. It was so much better and more interesting. So that's the kind of thing I want to do more of now.
Have you noticed that you're getting more offers, like more demand to do conferences because of you leveled up?
No, actually. No? You know why? Because I said no to like 30 in a row. Okay. And I think just the word got out that I think people just forgot. Like, because what would happen is people would see you at a conference and they would like what they see and they'd say, hey, I'm doing a conference. Because people who organize conferences, they go to other conferences. So conference organizers travel from conference to conference. And so people will see you and they're like, oh, can you speak at my conference also? So the more speaking you do, the more you get asked to do it. Okay. The less speaking you do, the less you get asked to do it.
Gotcha. You said one thing, though, when you're on stage, I guess in a comedy setting or a business conference or something, you're hyper aware of the audience. Like, so you've gotten better at reading the audience. How does that work? That became like a new superpower. Like you added that on.
Yeah,
that
was a huge
that feeling. What is that like?
And I noticed that even in the first couple of months I was doing stand-up, I had to do one talk at a very informal event, but it was still a talk. And I think it was around 15 minutes. And right away I noticed, oh, I'm feeling the audience completely differently than I used to. Like this table here, they're doing something with their phones. This group here is laughing and listening to me. This group here is listening, but they're not laughing. So you start to figure out who you should focus on depending on what your goal is for different parts of the talk. And then I started playing around with crowdsourcing the talk. So I would list subjects and let the audience pick through clapping that what subject I would talk about. And I would just try this out a couple of times. I didn't do this the last time I spoke, but that became interesting because then they chose the topic. They don't know I've prepared everything. Yeah. They feel they've selected. Yeah. So they have a cognitive bias to like what I'm saying more and to laugh even more. They don't know that I've over prepared for the talk. They don't know that I have like 3 talks of material ready and I could talk about anything. Or, so there was lots of like tricks that are maybe also even unique to my current stand-up act that I was doing even like 3 or 4 years ago that were just different. Everything was different. And then also sometimes if somebody's paying attention to you in the audience, sometimes that's the person you focus on. Sometimes the person who's not paying attention to you have to focus on because maybe they're being disturbing. One important thing you learn in stand-up comedy, but you don't really learn in public speaking, is you have to call you have to address what is happening in the room. So if there's noise next door, let's say in the conference room next door, you have to address that. It's very important. If there's unusual things in the room, you have to address that, because then people know that they're in this with you, and this is not just a prepared like a PowerPoint that you go on robotic remote control to give this PowerPoint and then you leave. Like, they need to know. You need to build a tribe, and you build a tribe by like, hey, here we all are. There's, why are the pipes exposed in this room? Why are there drawings of the Empire State Building in this room? Who drew that? What were they thinking? Is some psychotic person? It looks like a bomb explosion, and we're over there in that corner of the room. So you have to. I don't know. There's just so many things.
Yeah.
By the way, not only public speaking. When I go on TV, when you go on TV, what typically happens, particularly a news show, is there's 1 or 2 anchors, and there might be 1 to 3 or 0 to 3 other panelists. So there might be 5, 6, 7 people on the frame with you.
Okay.
And that's your audience, and you're the comedian. Doesn't mean you tell jokes, but you still have to control the audience.
Yeah.
Either you control the audience or they control you. And by the audience, I mean the anchors and the other panelists. Now, the anchors are professionals at doing it, but I notice with this new skill set, I could control the frame because they're not expecting me to.
Right.
And that's a good skill.
So what's another skill set that you're thinking of exercising? What's the next one? Like, in the Altucher.
Well, I always like to experiment with writing. I've been writing almost every day since 1990.
Yeah.
This is a long time.
Yeah.
It's almost 30 years.
Yeah.
And like all good things, it's because of women that I started writing. There was this girl in 1989 or whatever that I had a crush on, and she liked a friend of mine who kept carrying around a notebook and looked all hip and cool, and he said he was going to write the great American novel. I don't think he ever actually wrote anything, but I was thinking, oh, okay, that's how you get girls to maybe pay attention to you or notice who you are, because I wasn't having any luck with chess. Maybe this will work a little better. So I started writing, and again, doing the same approach, like reading every day, studying every day, writing every day, getting feedback. And it took me a long time to write stuff that was semi-good, but I'm always... And the problem now I have is I've written things that people like, and so there's a danger when people always think, oh, I don't want people to hate my writing. Just as dangerous, not in a bad way, I don't want people... But I was about to say, just as dangerous is people liking your writing. And that's not to say I don't like that. Like, I write because I want people to like my writing. The problem is not with them. The problem is with me. It's easy for the writer or the entrepreneur or whatever. It's easy for the writer to want to feed that beast, to turn the likers, not the haters, but the likers into a beast that you have to feed.
Yeah.
But the beast is a beast. It's going to go away, or it's going to eat you up eventually. You have to constantly keep reinventing yourself, even as a writer. And I think too many writers, they start to slip when they're like, oh gosh, the people really like this. I need to now figure out, what did I do? And I just keep repeating that. When actually you get better, you only get better as an artist by changing and growing and so on.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're talking about feeding the beast and like sort of giving them more of what they want or what you think they want, right? But then you fall into a trap. It's funny. Everything always goes back to Seinfeld at some point for me. Were you a big Seinfeld fan?
Yeah, of course.
Do you think they were guilty of that? Like, it was so good, and then by the third season, first season they're all feeling their characters out. George was basically doing a Woody Allen impression, but then like by the third, fourth season, it was hot, right? It was at the peak. Maybe fifth season, that whole masturbation episode, and then it's sort of, they became caricatures of themselves. Like, I don't know, did the writing team change, or did they get lazy, or did they want to feed the beast and give them more of what they wanted?
So because Seinfeld is considered the greatest sitcom in television history, whether it is or not, now with many new sitcoms, is it's hard to judge. But I've seriously studied the show. Like, I would study anything that's great. Like my own podcast is about peak performance. I really want to study how greatness is achieved.
Yeah.
So I say yes and no. I'll comment on a couple of things you said. First off, George was not doing a Woody Allen impression. He was doing a Larry David impression.
Ah.
So George was the Larry David character, and Larry David of course, Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld were the initial creators, but Larry David was really kind of the ultimate writer. So was Jerry Seinfeld, but Larry David maybe had a little bit more influence. Seinfeld was. Larry David contributed the darkness that kind of made Seinfeld
Curb
so
Your
special.
Enthusiasm.
Right, because Curb Your Enthusiasm is sort of a Seinfeld without Jerry Seinfeld, so it becomes much more dark, but just as funny.
Yeah.
And Larry David was a comedian. He also wrote for sketch shows like Fridays back in the early '80s.
Right.
That's where he met Michael Richards, also on Fridays. But anyway, so George was doing a Larry David impression. He was the Larry David character. But it's interesting you say Woody Allen, because Larry David, of course, was the Woody Allen stand-in on a Woody Allen movie much later. Woody Allen was always played himself in his first bunch of movies, but then he got too old.
Yeah.
So he's had people ranging from Jesse Eisenberg to Woody Allen playing the Woody Allen stand-in. So there is that connection. They're similar, but it's not quite. The other thing is, Larry David came in there with all these crazy New York City stories, and plus his all old comedy routines and so on. But at some point, he started to feel, I'm going to run out of stories. So every year, he hired a new set of writers who are basically stand-up comedians from New York City. He'd bring them out to L.A. They would write down all of their stories. He would pick which ones would be episodes. And he was very strict about it, and then he would rewrite everything. And then a year later, he would fire them all and bring in a new set of writers.
Okay.
And so that's how he kept it fresh. But so on the one hand, yes, he kept it fresh, so it wasn't just recycling those stories. But the problem is that you pointed out is that the writing staff did change. Larry David himself left the show about halfway through the series.
Okay.
And so I don't know if that made it. I'm not saying that made it better or worse. It was still a great show, and in fact, the most criticized Seinfeld show was the finale, the series finale, which he came back to write. So who knows? But of course, he went on to Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is also one of the greatest sitcoms in history.
Absolutely. Just the theme song pops in my head. It's just so catchy. You can't. Now that I put it in your head, it's going to be in your head all day.
Yeah.
And I heard them dissect that. I forgot the exact reasons why, like where that clown music came from. Sort of. Do you remember where that originated?
Yeah, he.
It's an
I
interesting
think Jeff
story.
Garland talked about it in his book. 'Cause when he came on the podcast, it's like he heard it. Oh yeah, he heard it on some commercial, like some just weird dumb commercial, and he's like, find that tune, and he bought that tune and put it on the show.
Wow. Yeah. So yeah, I had a list of questions for you, James, and I'm like, yeah, this is like totally off script, which is great because.
But it's good because
I love it.
The way to get good at anything is to just study anything you love.
Yeah.
And that'll help you get good at other things. So studying Seinfeld is a good way to like Larry David and and Jerry Seinfeld too, but let's just focus on Larry David for a second. He was, and he still is, he's an excellent leader. And you don't think, you watch Curb Your Enthusiasm and like, are you kidding me? He's just playing a character on, he's playing the Larry David he wishes he could be. That's not really him. So why do I say he's an excellent leader? Well, think about the four main characters. This is the first time this happened ever in a sitcom. With in each show, all four characters have a 3-act story that intermingles and interweaves with each other in the conclusion. That never happened before in a sitcom. And so you think, okay, he did that for creative reasons. That's genius. But no, he actually did that for management reasons. He didn't want any of the actors or actresses, he didn't want them bored sitting on the sidelines, one of his main actors, for an episode or two. So he always made sure each one was equally included with each episode. So they would feel just creatively fulfilled and keep on performing at their highest performance. And that was genius. That's what you want to do as a leader. And the way I described how the writing happened, you could say, oh, it's bad that he fired every season. Well, no, because all of those people went on to run excellent shows later because they had this Seinfeld experience. So he was just he had, that's why he had to quit after 5 years. He was such a great leader and he put so much effort into it. He just he got tired.
Yeah, it's brilliant. How did in the linear sort of timeline, your interest in being a comedian and being stand up and doing stand up, versus now being a partner in a stand-up nightclub. Like, how did that fuse together? How did that all happen for you? Did you, manifest it, or did you make it all?
Yeah, well, I was performing at a variety of places. This was one of them, and I had some ideas for this place, and I really liked Donnie Zolden, who was the main owner at the time, and he's, he and I are equal now here, but he wanted, we were always talking ideas, and I said, look, how about I become a partner? And it's just a little bit at a time over the years. I became more and more of a partner until now we're co-owners of this place. And part of that is business. I figured, okay, maybe this is one way to combine my business expertise with my interest in comedy. Yeah. But, comedy club's not really a great investment as far as the other types of investing I do. I mean, it's actually, if you're interested in the other types of investing I do, then definitely do not invest in a comedy club. That's the worst type of investment you can do. And but it was fun, and it was also a way. I always try to figure out how can I skip the line, not in terms of, I never use my status to say, well, I'm forcing myself to go on stage today, and they're like, you can't. Tough, I'm going up. I never do that. Like if I feel like I'm not good or bad, I won't go up. And they'll tell me too, if what's going on, like you shouldn't go up on a Saturday night this week. They definitely have not had any problems telling me not to go up. And so, but I skip the line in the sense that it gives me exposure to a lot of comedians who then, among my 500 podcasts, maybe 20 or 30 of them have been among my favorite comedians. So not 3 to 5%, but still significant enough that imagine you want to get good at tennis and you get to interview the top 20 tennis players in the world, and they get to show you things about, that they wouldn't show anybody else. That's great. That's to improve your tennis. And then not only that, I probably do get up a little bit more than I would have as someone only doing it 4 years. 4 years is considered a baby in the comedy world. 20 years, some of these guys are doing it and they're still working on their success and so on. So I've skipped the line a little bit that way, but I attribute it, let's say, somewhat to my increase in ability, and now somewhat to, it does help a little to be so involved in the scene. It's a little easier. But I get up at other comedy clubs too, where they're certainly not putting me up because I own another comedy club. If anything, that prevents me from going up at other clubs. So
it's brilliant though to be able to invest in something that you can actually enjoy and use, and sort of, like you said, fuse it with your other interests and stuff that you're passionate about.
And because I've analyzed or been involved in no less than 1,000 businesses, I'm able to kind of look at different things and say, well, why don't we try this business model? Or this is the time to give up on this attempt. Let's pivot to this attempt. Because I've just seen so many business models, and I haven't been actively involved in 1,000 businesses, but I've looked and studied and broken down well over 1,000 businesses as an investor, as an entrepreneur, as a venture capitalist, as a hedge fund manager, as a writer. I've been exposed to so many business models. Yeah. I could just go. I could do 27 podcasts in a row about just business models.
It's brilliant. It made me realize, because I had Donnie on the podcast, and he talked about, I was like, if there's anything you could have done different or anything you could have adjusted.
He said I would never have brought in James Altucher as a partner. That guy has opposite. Fucked up my shit so much.
Well, you weren't mentioned by name, but he did talk about how he was like, I was sort of asleep the first 10 years. I guess, how long was it until you came?
9 years.
Yeah, so he said about 10 years I was asleep, and he goes, I didn't do a whole lot with what I could have done. And now I see the direct correlation with you coming in, and now with Laugh Pass and Laugh and Tight Five and Podcast Row. There's all these businesses that are ancillary right to this, which normally you wouldn't expect to come with a stand-up club.
Right. A comedy club is first and foremost a bar.
Yeah.
That's where your profits are on alcohol. Yep. And then it's a comedy club. There's a stage and an audience and so on. Because you could use that space to extend your bar, or you can use that to have shows. And so a comedy club is this bar plus a showroom. Yeah. And then, but you wouldn't think, other things have an odd internet component. Like a Laugh Pass is sort of half a real world thing, half an internet thing.
Yeah.
We have an ad agency that takes comedians and tries to use it to make brand advertising funnier. Well, I had an ad agency in the 90s and things like that. I'm able to either help their initial efforts, or really give them like 1,000 top ideas on top of what they're trying to do and how they can build more customers, and kind of analyze, let's say, all the types of business models that can result, but which ones historically get the highest valuations more quickly.
Yeah.
Because I have a catalog of this stuff since the 90s.
Right.
And I see how things evolve much more quickly. Like, is it better to be a web agency, or is it better to kind of take what you do over and over again for clients and make that a product, and now you're a product company? Well, you'll make the same revenues either way, but when you sell the company, the product company is worth 10 times what an agency would be, even if you have the same revenues. So it's just knowing things like that.
Right.
And then that suggests a strategy. Well, how do we productize this? Okay, well, here's the 5 ways here's what we should productize, and here's the 5 ways you should productize it, and here are the potential buyers of that type, and here's how you change your sales to sell a product instead of a service, even though it's the same clients and the same ultimate result, and so on. So it's a lot of businesses messaging and perception and sales.
Yeah.
If you just have a good product, you're kind of sunk as a business.
So how often do you guys meet and talk about new business strategies and creating new products?
I mean, we see each other almost every day or so, but
So you don't have formal meetings, and
we meet like every month, something like that.
Yeah.
But I saw him yesterday, I see him all the time.
Because I know that because you're very creative, you're analytical, you're both sides, and like, how do you filter all these ideas and know which ones? Okay, this one seems like something we need to implement.
Well, you don't really know in advance which ideas are good or bad, so it's just like people. What's the thing? You hire slowly and fire fast.
Yeah.
But I do hire fast and fire fast. So doing everything fast. So you have a business idea. Okay, here's the easiest way we could try it. Let's do it tomorrow. Did it work? No. Let's move on to the next one.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, you just have experience knowing. I see all the time people who have a good idea, but their first sets of ideas. People say, "Oh, ideas are a dime a dozen. Execution's everything." That is so incorrect, that statement. Ideas are not a dime a dozen. A good idea is hard. Second, execution, there's easy ways to execute and there are hard ways to execute. If you have to have good execution ideas to execute in a smart way. Can I tell you an example?
Yeah.
So I have one friend who came up with a great business idea. I love the idea. And I won't describe specifically what the idea is, but she wanted to raise $100,000, then hire a software company, to work on it, and it would take about 6 months to make the product, and then she would find customers who were interested. And I'm like, wait a second, why don't you just call up a friend of yours who's in the situation? Every business starts off, someone's in a struggle, and you have a product that solves the struggle. Yeah. So, just like a story. And I said, why don't you just call up someone who is in the struggle? And she's like, oh, I know 10 people like that. And I said, okay, why don't you manually do what you're suggesting your software would do? Because you'll do it probably as fast as the software or as fast as the customer cares about anyway. And then you'll see right away, did they feel like this was worth paying for? Did they really want it? How did they use it? What extra things did they ask for that you wouldn't have expected? Why raise $100,000, spend 6 months building software, and then there's these 20 new features that you didn't even think of that and by the way, it's hard to raise money. Now I just gave her an entire way to execute on this entire idea to determine if she has a valid business or not. Yeah. And then, by the way, once she executes on the service, on actually manually doing this, let's say for 10 people, now she has testimonials, maybe even kind of authority status if she works with, other companies to help distribute her service or whatever. Now it'll be trivial for her to raise money. She has revenues, profits. It has to be profitable because she hasn't raised money. And she knows exactly what feature set she needs because she got feedback from a dozen people. So, or maybe even more.
Brilliant.
So that's, execution's everything, but she could have really screwed herself if she executed it that way as opposed to my way.
Gotcha. So the idea was there, but right. There's ways to be more efficient, right, in the way you're executing it.
Right. And execution depends on execution ideas. You have to have the best ideas on how to execute. Now, how do you have those ideas? Well, again, through 30 years of trial and error starting businesses, that's how. The very first business I started was 1987, and it's a lot of The first 3 businesses I started, I told myself, never again. I hate this. I hate being rejected. I hate losing. I'll rise up at a company and write on the side the great American novel, and that's how I'll structure my life. And it just didn't work out that way. But you get a lot of experience. Because then by the time of the 3rd or the 4th time, I had already failed at like 3 or 4 businesses by my mid-20s. And finally, I'm like, okay, this is what I did wrong. This is what I did right. This is how I executed wrong. And by the way, I was still horrible at it. Maybe I'm still horrible at it. I don't know. I really am learning every day about business. I know some people who are like 100 times better than me at business, and I'm learning from them every single day.
How often do you keep them? Like, do you communicate with them?
Every day.
Every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I talk with the people better than me every day because I want to keep track of what they're investing in, so I make sure don't forget to include me in the deal. And then I also, because we're already invested in so many deals and they're so much better at business. By the way, when I say so much better, maybe 80% they're better than me at and 20% I'm better than them at. So I'm able to always make sure I offer them something.
Right.
And that's why they want to talk to me.
Gotcha.
Otherwise, they're just like, stop calling me. So I always have to make sure I'm good enough. I have something unique to offer. But in general, they're 80% of business, in some senses, they're better than me at. But so I'm always calling them to keep track of, hey, what's going on with this company? What's going on with this company? And then I'm able to offer some ideas. That's ostensibly the reason I'm calling them. But I really just want information. Hey, how am I doing today? And then I talk with partners who are more on the same level as me, and we strategize, okay, where do we need to be shifting focus, shifting awareness, shifting resources, whether it's time or money or energy or connections. Who do we need to be helping today? So I talk with my partners who are at my level. And then I write every day about my experiences, and I go on podcasts. And so people who maybe don't have the same level of experience or have a different kind of experience, they get to both be entertained and benefit from my experience. And when I say be entertained, it's because I've sucked so much. I find that that's entertaining to people.
That's definitely, I think, one of your superpowers is being so vulnerable and authentic, and people just gravitate towards that. I know I did, reading your books and your blogs, and I'm like, man, this is different. This voice is different because a lot of people don't want to put that out there for fear of, discrediting themselves or whatever. And you just put it all out there, which is great.
Yeah, and again, because, that was sort of a style I played with a little bit when I was writing a column for the Financial Times. I started writing for the Financial Times in 2004 till 2010. But then it was really a voice that picked up for me in a big way in mid-2010, and that became the beast that I started to feed. So I always have to be careful not staying only in that lane. That's my challenge as a writer. But people, again, they were entertained because they would read, particularly then. Now, so-called failure porn, I feel, is a lot more common in the business self-help world and in the blogging world. And I call it failure porn because I feel it's sort of my style, but not quite. It's like I don't want to criticize, but it's just not quite the way I would do things. It's not like I'm proud of my failures. I don't wear them as badges of honor. But I think people want to know that, okay, everyone says, the 7 habits of being great. Well, I don't know. I want to avoid also the 7 mistakes that you can commonly make, or the 100 mistakes you can commonly make. I've made thousands of mistakes. I remember one time, because it's also like I'm the type of person, I tend to believe most things that I hear. So you really have to learn through lots of experience, skepticism, and how to be skeptical. But even after 25 years, I remember in 2012, this guy went all the way from one end of Long Island all the way to Manhattan, then took a train all the way up to Cold Spring, New York, 60 miles away, where I lived at the time. He knew exactly when I was going to go to breakfast and what place I went to breakfast at because I had written about it. And so he comes running up from the train station, he's all red and sweating, and he's like, James Altucher, I have to pitch you something. And I said, all right, pitch me. And he's like, no, I can't. I got to go back now. I got to run around and take the train back. But can we meet like during the week in the city? And I was just so taken with how the effort he had put in. I figured, oh, this must be good. He had used kind of this cognitive bias on me. And so I said, sure. In his pitch, he pitched this amazing technology. He was like a PhD in chemistry. He pitched this amazing technology. But then he was pitching more and more things. And I swear to God, on the last page, he was pitching me that he was going to make a time machine. And I invested.
What?
And this is 2012. It's not that long ago.
Wow.
And this is after, by the way, I had been I have said no to thousands of investment opportunities. And somehow I said that were much more realistic than this.
Do you have
And somehow-
diagrams? And
Yeah, everything.
It totally made sense.
Totally made sense. And I wasn't drinking, was in an office. And so I invested, and huge mistake. But it wasn't a huge mistake for the reasons you think. It was a huge mistake because he was insane.
Yeah.
And once you start, and I don't say it in a bad way. It's
Right.
like it's not the sort of person I wanted to deal with every single day. And often you invest in somebody, and if they need help, you have to deal with them every single day.
Right.
But I did end up selling. I said, I got to get out of this business. So I ended up selling his business.
Okay.
And it turned out to work out really well for me, but not the time machine part. There were
Yeah.
other aspects,
Right.
that he did have some technology that was very good. And I sold the business for good reasons. The buyers I still am in touch with, and we work together on a lot of deals. But we all know that was insane at the time. It's just the buyers wanted me more involved with their company.
Right.
And I said, this is a way to do it. And by the way, here's a story we could tell about this business in your messaging to clients. And
Okay.
Anyway, but this is all like complicated things. Like, what do you do with that was definitely a major failure on my part, but it also showed that I had all this enormous experience and success from investing, but still was able to fall into some very, very basic traps.
Yeah.
But then also how you get out of those traps. You don't have to just give up. You don't have to fix them. You can have there's many alternatives when you're in a bad situation.
There's so many things there to unpack, but I know we're running out of time here. Are we good, Jay? So like how often do you just rely on your gut when it comes to situations like that? When you want to invest in something or someone, like, do you just do the whole exercise, like a best case scenario, worst case scenario, most likely case scenario?
That's so I will say that's two questions. So I'll answer the first one first. How often do I rely on my gut? Never. Mm-hmm. And the reason is because of situations like what I just described. Yeah. I've had this rule since 2007, which is that I will invest only if it's basically the first round. So I'm not investing at a high valuation, which, by the way, that's not always a good strategy. Mm-hmm. Peter Thiel, the billionaire, he has the exact opposite strategy. He invests if something's at the $1 billion round, because by then he knows the company's gotten over the hump with their business model. Mm-hmm. They have figured out their messaging and perception so that other people think it's worth $1 billion. And if investors are investing at a $1 billion valuation, they have a plan in place to take this higher. Yeah. So the only time I haven't done that rule lately was I invested in Slack at a $1 billion valuation. But so the first rule is I'll get in the first round. Second rule is only invest if there's other investors investing side by side with me. Mm-hmm. So I'm not investing against them. They have to be side by side, mm-hmm. and they have to be smarter than me. Mm-hmm. So I know that my gut is not so good. Look, I just invested in a time machine. So my gut is not so good. And it's better for me to invest with people smarter and let them do all the hard due diligence. They've got 50 PhDs running around doing due diligence. They'll do all the background checks. Mm-hmm. They'll drill down. They'll talk to the kid's kindergarten teacher, the CEO's kindergarten teachers. They'll do all the hard work. And they have more connections than me. So, you always want to make sure you can get out of a business by having it get sold so they can know they can get it sold. So, for instance, I invested in 2007 in a company, Buddy Media. The CEO was smarter than me. That story of that company is a podcast in and of itself. But suffice to say, the CEO had demonstrated to me a year earlier that he was much more intelligent than me. He had already started and sold another business. People don't realize that selling a business is just as hard as starting it. I know plenty of CEOs who've got great businesses, but they do not know how to sell their businesses. That's a very important skill, to know how to create value out of what you create, monetary value out of this asset that you've created. Very hard skill. So I knew he knew how to do that skill. And then, by the way, Peter Thiel was investing in that round side by side with me at like a $2.5 million valuation. It's Peter Thiel, Mark Pincus, who started Zynga. Peter Thiel was the first investor in Facebook. This company, Buddy Media, was like a CRM company for companies that wanted to get on Facebook. So I figured, let's have the first investor in Facebook be an investor alongside, side by side, same rules as me. And that's basically it. That's my rules. So, and if even just a smart, like if Warren Buffett's investing in a company and he says, James, I'm not even going to tell you what the company is. Will you invest alongside me? I'm going to say yes, because what am I going to do? I'm going to like, Warren, how could you have invested in this? I'm so much smarter than you. Like, what are you doing? And no, I'm just going to write a check. But that's okay. That's the other rule. No more than 1 to 2% of my net worth in any one deal. That's a critical rule. People don't realize that's a very important aspect of investing. The less money you invest, the more money you make. I'm not going to explain why that is true, but if you think about it, listeners should think about it, it is always true. The less money you invest, the more money you make. And I'm not talking about diversification, although that's part of it. The more money you will make on that deal, one deal. And so now that takes the gut out of it.
Yeah.
Oh, Warren Buffett's in there. It's the first round. CEO sold a company before. Boom. Here's the check. 1% of my portfolio. Done. I don't have to do any work. It's just what you need the money in an hour. Okay. And then, by the way, I have a business partner. Wire the money. And then his rule is, he asked me, did you do your rules? And I said yes. And he says, okay, I'm in also. And he wires the money. So
awesome.
But then there was a second part of your question, which was
the best case, worst case, most likely.
Yeah. So every single day I have a spreadsheet, and I have, let's say, 30 angel investments on there. And every single day, based on what news is happening that day or week, I adjust best case, worst case, probable case of the outcomes, because that helps me plan my life. And worst case is this company IPOs in 2023, and here's what it's probably going to be worth. So make sure when I'm thinking about what 1% of my portfolio is, I'm working off the worst case scenario conservatively. But does that mean I have enough cash while I'm waiting for an IPO in 2023, worst case? And so I have to do that analysis every day.
Do you have separate spreadsheets for your current portfolio and then one for your potentials? And how does that all work?
Just current. Yeah, just current.
Okay.
Because even potentials have an expected value. So I have on my spreadsheet an investment that will probably occur 2 months from now, and it's the probable outcome is less than once I invest, but there's still a probable outcome. It's just maybe there's a 50-50 chance I invest, so it's half of what.
How often do you get pitched to?
Not a lot anymore. I used to get pitched a lot more, but now I avoid pitches because I find the smart people that I like piggybacking, and I just stick to them. If I was more aggressively, you don't need how much, I enjoy doing stand-up comedy. I'm not really I'm not a 24-hour a day, and I enjoy writing, and I enjoy doing podcasts. So if I was doing investing 24 hours a day, I would be more active about getting pitched, working with smart people. But I have enough smart people around me that I'm going to get one good deal a year. And I've been doing this since 2007. So again, I'm in 30 different deals now. I don't even want to go into any new deals. I'm going in a new deal in the next 2 months, like I mentioned, but that's just a surprise. Like I didn't have to go into any new deal. I didn't necessarily want to go into any new deals this year.
Well, okay. Yeah, I got one more question for you, a selfish question, because this is what I'm sort of modeling and trying to figure out. What do you recommend for businesses that are already from day one knowing that they are positioning themselves to sell? It's not going to be some legacy thing passing on to the next generation. It's actually, what do you recommend the early stages of that type of business to start making these decisions that lead you down that path?
So why is this your one selfish question?
Because that's my company.
So you're thinking of selling, or are you thinking you would like to sell?
Yeah, I'd like for it to be at a certain value in my mind, at a period of time, worth this much with the option to sell it.
So first off, I hate when people say, "Oh, this is my baby. I'm never selling this. I love this. Like if I sold this, what would I do? I would just do the same thing." Look, buddy, you're not Mark Zuckerberg. Just every single business I've ever started was for sale 1 minute after I started it. Like literally was for sale. Like if someone had came to me, I remember one time I just had an idea and I was pitching a CEO to be my partner on it. And I was actually thinking of saying, "Hey, you can buy it for X millions of dollars." I was thinking of saying that, and I called my partner, and he's like, "He's just don't do that because he's not going to buy a business that's 1 minute old for millions of dollars." So I didn't do that. He did buy it later for 10 million, but that was after it was a proven business. But to answer your question, so to start, everything is for sale all the time. I would start thinking, who are your potential buyers? Mm-hmm. I would start thinking, what is your equity value? Meaning, if you were to, when the problem with like an ad agency, as an example, is what are the assets of an ad agency? When you shut the lights out, all the people are gone, and an ad agency depends on its people. Mm-hmm. So ad agencies sell for much less than software companies because software companies are very scalable. I can sell at no additional cost. I could sell 1 million copies of software for the same as I can sell 1 copy of the software. So, you have to decide, how are you increasing the equity value of your business? Now, an ad agency, you could say, has recurring contracts, so that's an asset of the business. So you have to think then, oh, we have a brand. Everybody knows us for this. That's an asset of the business. So you start collecting, what are your assets that actually have value? And it's fair to say you're an asset of the business, because when you sell the company, depending on how valuable you are to your business, you're going to have to sign, let's say, a 3-year employment contract, or give back some of the proceeds of the business, or maybe you'll get paid the final proceeds in 3 years. That's called an earnout. So you have to determine, is that something you want? One time I had a fund of hedge funds that I thought was valuable enough to sell. So I got a deal together to sell it. We got an offer. I liked it. We got the deal. It was a 7-year employment. The deal specifically was a 7-year employment contract for me. And if I ever quit at any point, I had to refund the entire deal price, or they could fire me at any point without reason, and then I have to return the entire deal price. So I didn't realize the entire business was wrapped around the value of me. Yeah. So I shut that business down and started a new business, because what was the point? I'm not going to do that business the rest of my life. The point of starting something is to sell it and make money and live a good life. So and then I would start courting your buyers early. So let's say a potential buyer is, I'm going to make it up, Google. Well, find an area on Google you could talk to and say, "Hey, I have a product I would love to talk to you about. Maybe you need to use this as a customer. Maybe Google needs your special whatever CRM product or analytics product. I'd like to show you my analytics product. Maybe you can use this as a customer internally, or my intranet product, Google HR could use this." And so you start to build relationships within all of your buyers, or you start to refer clients. So when I had an ad agency, I would refer clients to other ad agencies. So if somebody wanted a television commercial, I didn't do that. I did websites. So I would say, "Okay, this ad agency does television commercials," and I'd call them up. "I have a client for you. Would you do Mitsubishi's television commercials?" And that's how I build great relationships with my potential buyers. Then I would say to them, I'd meet them for lunch, because they would want to meet, like, "Oh, is this guy going to send us more business?" And so they would want to wine and dine me a little bit. And I would say, "Let me ask your advice. Here's the path to making 100 million in profits for my business." And I would show a real path. "But I feel like I don't want to raise money, but I want a bigger partner. And I really like working with other bigger partners who I can offer more services to. Yeah. What's your advice that I should do? I don't really know what to do. And you're so good at this. Like, what should you do? What would you do if you were me?" What are they going to say? They're going to say, "Hey, maybe we should buy you." Yeah. And that happens 9 times out of 10. The advice technique,
it's brilliant.
It works really well.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah.
But product, productize, make connections, the advice technique, have good long-term contracts with employees, with customers, have opportunities for scaling, whether it's brand or productizing, and then also to prepare, make sure you have these are nuts and bolts, but make sure you have an audit, because you're going to have to do that anyway. So if you don't have an audit done, as soon as someone offers to buy your company, they're going to get buyer's remorse more than you're going to get seller's remorse. And so they're going to say to themselves after a month, oh my God, did I offer to buy this crappy company? And so you want to make sure the legal is done within that first month, which is really hard to do. So make sure you have an audit ready to go. Make sure you have your contracts ready to show. Make sure your relationship with your landlord is good, because he has to approve you making millions of dollars.
Right.
Because you're no longer going to be his tenant. The buyer is going to be his tenant. So he has to sign off on the deal. This is something everybody forgets about, and they have bad relationships with their landlords. Landlords, I'm not signing any approval here. You're going to have to figure this out yourself. And then you have to pay off your landlord. And so there's lots of tricky issues and then make sure business is good, that your business is not going to fall apart in the potentially 3 months it takes to close a deal, because there's going to be a clause, if the business has substantially changed, the deal's off. And so that's a short answer. As with all these questions, there's much bigger answers, but A, your business is for sale. B, start getting it ready today.
Awesome. So it's never too soon.
Too soon.
Start figuring that out.
No, awesome. The fastest business turnaround I had, I started a business, sold it 4 months later.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
And I had like good revenues too, and I had 1 million unique users to a website, and sold it 4 months later.
Holy crap.
And then the worst business, I started a business, raised money, shut it down a day later.
Oh wow.
But wired back all the money. Okay. I didn't steal the money. It's like Fire Festival 2. Or Theranos.
Oh my God. Great documentaries, by the way. Circling back, bookending of television here.
Yes.
But yeah, thank you so much, Mr. James Altucher. I
Thank you,
appreciate
Erik.
being on the show.
Thank you for having me on your podcast. I hope I didn't talk too much, and I hope I answered your questions.
Not at all.
If your listeners want to ask me more questions, ask me on Twitter @JAltucher.
Yeah.
Just ask me, and I'll try to answer. Mention your name and mention me, and then ask a question, and then I'll try to answer.
Is that the best place to reach you on Twitter? You're everywhere.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
You're everywhere. Yeah.
I'm not promoting. Don't even follow me on Twitter. Just you can ask the question without following me. I'm not trying to promote anything.
And then if you write him an email, he'll write you 5 years later. And,
yes, that I will do. I'm always surprised when people say, I texted you, and I'm like, oh, did I respond? And they say, yeah, I'm really great. You really responded, and it did change this for me. I'm really surprised, because I don't respond to almost anything. And so I'm always really happy, like, oh, thank God I responded to this guy.
It's awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
You have now entered the entrepreneur circle.